Hello, welcome to the Centre for Brexit's YouTube channel. Today we're joined by our director, Professor Alex de Ruyter. So Alex, Labour's new leader and the end of Brexit as an election issue will not be enough for the party to win back power. That's what a review of the party's 2019 defeat has warned. What do you think the Labour Party needs to do right, and perhaps the Conservative Party to do wrong, for them to even have a chance at doing well at the next election?
Beth, yeah, I mean, it's a time old positions rarely win elections to governments that generally lose them. And for Labour, of course, the challenges are huge and significant. And Ed Miliband obviously makes the point that just to get a one-seat majority, Labour need a huge 50-seat. I mean, they can't win in that majority, I think, in their own right, unless they back their position in Scotland. Given the ground that the SNP have made there, that seems next to impossible. So I think that the notion of Labour forming a government in their own right anytime soon, frankly, is one that's not likely to happen. I think the best scenario for them at the moment is as part of a centre-left coalition, and whether that includes the Lib Dems or whether that includes some kind of arrangement with the SNP, for example, forward. It is all on the table, but I think what that's is that the electoral coalition that is in opposition to the Conservatives, and I think for them going forward, they're going to have to take that idea seriously, that they would have to seriously entertain governing in some fashion with other parties to get that majority. Now, of course, the one caveat is the prospect that the SNP will have a working majority in the Holyrood election next year, and as part of that, they will have an independence referendum on the table, and if they get that and they were to win it in, for argument's sake, 2022, 2023, that would make the electoral arithmetic around a Westminster coalition involving them somewhat null and void. So therein lies a real challenge for Labour. Having said that, there is clearly a majority in the country, even in England, that would support broad stroke Labour policies around redistribution and helping the neediest, as we see with the current issue around free school meals, for example. So there is an inbuilt majority for Labour policies. I mean, the NHS was a Labour creation, by Nye Bevan and Clement Attlee back in the 40s. And the NHS is still a treasured institution in this country. So we have this peculiar quandary where Labour appeared rejected, for a large chunk due to its leadership and its attitude towards Brexit, more open than any substantive policies. Bearing in mind, of course, we have a Conservative government at the moment in response to COVID-19 that's pursuing state intervention on a scale that, had it been done by Corbyn and McDonnell, would have had, much of the media tearing their hair out and screaming communist blue murder. But there are some demographic changes here that Labour need to be cognizant, of course, cognizant of the electoral coalition that sustained them in the post-war years, the trade unions, the blue-collar working class voters fractured in recent years with the growth of identity-based politics, and Brexit certainly drove a wedge through all that. But those Labour Leave voters, are no less attached to the notion of a welfare state. I think what did for the party in that regard, was its inability to articulate a clear Brexit stance. Now that boil has been lanced, one might say, the UK has left the EU, Brexit has been done in that sense. It allows Labour to move on from that debate and try and reframe it in terms of rebuilding a social democratic consensus. Corbyn, of course, was also seen as an electoral liability in the end. Starmer appears to be enjoying a honeymoon and is a very different kettle of fish. So in terms of the people they have on board now, Ed Miliband rejoining the fold as Shadow Business Secretary, for example, questions over the fitness to govern or competency of the Labour leadership should diminish, and now it's a case of winning the ideas and not getting sidetracked into culture wars.
So UK debt is now bigger than the economy for the first time since 1963, with the government having borrowed a record 55 billion in May on back of the coronavirus crisis. How long do you think it could take for the UK to actually recover from this?
Well, I'm quite sanguine about that debt to GDP ratio. I think, for the bulk of the UK's post-war history, I mean, that ratio is, thereabouts 100% or more. So what, if my mortgage is bigger than the value of my income in a given year, I don't, scream blue murder to try and pay it off as quickly as possible. I'll let my earnings over my lifetime take care of that. And having said that, there is a key difference here. Margaret Thatcher liked to compare the economy to a household, but the government is not a household. The government does not have a finite working life. It doesn't have to pay its debt off in 28 years because it's going to retire. We can pay that off over quite a long time and just let economic growth take care of it so that the tax receipts look after themselves. Bearing in mind, it took 70 years to pay off the Second World War debt. Never did the UK any harm during that period, so I don't see any need to rush to re-embrace austerity or spending cuts or tax rises in this situation. I think with the economy still bottoming out, because of the COVID-19 induced disruption, the last thing we'd want to see at this point is a government trying to tighten the spending reins.
And Boris Johnson has told Emmanuel Macron that extending Brexit talks beyond summer makes no sense, backing efforts to secure a UK-EU trade deal. So do you think this is positive news and perhaps makes a deal look more likely now?
No, I think the opposite. I think it actually makes a deal less likely. And I think the most probable outcome at the end of this will be no deal by the end of the year, and probably not even that long. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One is that the COVID-19 induced economic disruption, I think, has led to many in government ranks saying, well, then the hit of a no deal will be less unpalatable, because compared to the 20-30% hit to GDP that COVID-19 is generating, a 9% hit under a no deal scenario will seem less significant. And therefore that in the government's ranks, then any ongoing disruption caused by a no deal could well just be attributed to fallout from COVID-19. The second point that I want to touch on, I think, is that the government's thinking has become increasingly likely to call an early end to the talks beyond June, so that businesses will have the new economic reality there and then and can start to make plans to adjust. Whereas if they just go on talking into September, October, when both sides are poles apart, I think would be, in the eyes of at least some in the government and Boris Johnson himself, would be more disruptive to business. So you can see they're already moving to a phase where they're trying to cushion the impact of no deal by doing things such as, alleviating import duties for 6 months after the end of December. These are not the actions of a government that appears seriously intent on securing an agreement with the EU. And let's just revisit what the main sticking points are here. The government and those at the heart of the UK negotiating team balk at any notion of continued regulatory alignment with Brussels, in the form of these so-called level playing field provisions. The Brexiteers at the heart of government and at the heart of the UK negotiating team don't want any form of regulatory compromise with Brussels. They will embrace a free trade agreement if they can get one, but not if it comes with strings attached in terms of having to pursue continued adherence to regulatory standards. And that's a really difficult one to square, because for the EU, it's an existential issue. They are not going to grant ready market access to an ex-member country that wishes to pursue regulatory divergence in areas such as labour laws or environmental standards or consumer protection, or indeed attitudes to state aid. And of course, with COVID-19, state aid has become a real big issue. So for all those reasons, I think, the government are just going through the motions in talk of an agreement. Johnson's lazy comment about an agreement possible by July is just, I don't know how serious he is in saying that. That's just wishful thinking. Barnier himself, Michel Barnier, the EU chief negotiator, has consistently talked about 3 years as a minimum for a trade agreement. Bear in mind, it took the EU and Canada 8 years, and it took the EU and Japan 9 years to reach a trade agreement. That the notion that we're going to have, the semblance of a trade deal in place within 6 weeks, frankly, is laughable. So no, I think no deal is more likely now.
Thanks for joining us, Alex.
You're welcome, Beth.